The Pacific at dawn wears a color that does not have a name in any pilot's manual, a muted blue that feels both infinite and unforgiving. The air is cool and salted, the horizon a taut line, and somewhere beneath it rides a weaponized silence. On this morning in early June, the sea does not hint at the thunder it will hold by noon. It is June 4th, 1942, and for hours the ocean pretends to be a simple mirror of sky. Sailors move carefully on decks that smell of paint and oil. Petty officers bark orders that echo across the steel. And on a carrier's flight deck, the slow, sturdy shapes of SBD Dauntless dive bombers wait with their perforated dive brakes, their canopies glazed with dew, their wings folded like the hands of a patient animal. Slow. That was the word. The Japanese had said it more than once, and they were not wrong. The SBD was not fast, it was not sleek. It did not dazzle in the way a Zero did. But waiting quiet in the morning, the SBD has another language. One written with rivets and resilience, with reliability and a descent angle like a blade. Somewhere west sits the Kido Butai, the most fearsome carrier strike force the world has known. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. Names that have gathered victories like bright thread since the start of the war. Their captains' watches mark time in clean increments. Their radio rooms trace the world as a set of vectors. Their air crews move with practiced precision. Their Zero fighters are the hawks of the high air, their dive bombers and torpedo planes well-drilled instruments of punishment. Between them lies the island of Midway, a small atoll ringed with reefs, a patch of land the map barely bothers to name, and yet the war's fate will pass through it like a spear. The island's airfields bristle with hurried defenses. The Marines and Navy personnel there have done what they can. PBY Catalinas have ranged far to peer over the curvature of the world. B-17s have droned across water that makes everything look small and far away. Behind it all is a secret. The reason the American carriers are not where they ought to be by the math of Japanese planning. In the underground rooms at Pearl Harbor, a codebreaker named Rochefort and his team have listened to the hidden breath of the enemy and teased out meaning. AF is short of water, they hear themselves say in a trap sent across the ether, and soon the Japanese message returns confirming that AF is Midway. It is not luck, it is labor, skill, a quiet form of courage. Because of it, Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet do not wait to be found. They wait to strike. Before first light on the American decks, pilots zip up flight suits that smell like canvas, oil, and fear held in check. They fold maps into pockets. They slap shoulders and grin where they can. They check the straps of their Mae West vests. They swing into cockpits and make small, private motions with their hands, touching metal that will soon feel like a living thing. The SBDs grumble awake, propellers clawing at the air. Flight deck crews move in purposeful choreography, pushing, chocking, signaling. The stall warning horns, the magneto checks, the flickers of flame in exhaust stacks. All of it begins to build toward a line of motion that will fling these machines into the sky. The first Dauntless rolls forward. Then another. They lift into the cold morning, their engines a steady hurting sound, climbing into the brittle light. The Japanese carriers have been launching and recovering planes since dawn. They have already hit Midway. The island burns in places. The atoll's defenders have thrown everything up that could fly, and many of those wings have not returned. In the Japanese flag plot, officers consider new strikes and alter bomb loads on decks where aircraft sit fueled and armed. The planes are moved and moved again, torpedoes shuttled back to racks, bombs reattached, hoses running, the decks alive with careful danger. Above them, the combat air patrol of Zeros turns lazy figure eights, waiting for the next threat line to brighten on the map. The first American planes to find the Japanese are not the ones that will kill them. The early sighting comes from a PBY, eyes strained over the ocean. Radio calls flicker across frequencies. And then from 3 American carriers, the torpedo squadrons go in low, each at treetop height in a place with no trees. They are devastators, old by the standards of a war that makes machines obsolete almost as soon as they are pushed to war. VT-8 from Hornet, VT-6 from Enterprise, VT-3 from Yorktown. They fan out like lines drawn by a hand that trembles but does not break. The Zeros see them first, of course, and then the Japanese carriers see them by the white bookmarks of their wakes. The Devastators fly into a hornet's nest with more guts than odds. Their pilots keep going because that is the way the plan works, and because standing down feels like a form of dying all its own. You do not tell history no when it has put the yoke in your hand. They are cut apart. There is no romance to it. There is courage, which is different. The Devastators hold steady and drop torpedoes that will not run true often enough, torpedoes that have not yet had a chance to be trustworthy. The Zeros rake them. The shipboard anti-aircraft mount spit fields of shrapnel where the sky is suddenly confetti of tracer and smoke. The ocean receives the torn planes with indifferent arms. Ensigns become names on lists. A lone pilot lives to float and watch, and he carries that knowledge with him the rest of his life. The torpedo attacks fail to detonate properly against the target that matters most. But their failure is not really failure. It is disruption. It is a clock being knocked askew. It is a set of eyes pointed down that forget to look up. The SBDs from Enterprise and Yorktown and Hornet have been searching. Somewhere up there, the sky is both map and maze. The air groups have launched, rendezvoused, separated, found nothing, corrected, fought winds, and drift. One leader, Wade McClusky from Enterprise, chooses to keep searching rather than descend back to a deck that will feel like a confession. He sees a thin wake, a sliver of disturbance drawn by a Japanese destroyer pushing fast, perhaps detached to chase an American shadow that pricked the perimeter. He follows it, stone in his gut that could be conviction or stubbornness. The path leads not to emptiness, but to ships where there should be sky. The SBDs press on. The world constricts to tactical essentials. The sun is higher now. The air has warmed. Down below, the Japanese decks are packed like shelves in a fireworks shop. The Dauntless is slow, yes, in level flight compared to the thoroughbreds of the age, but the SBD is built to fall. It does not tumble, it chooses. At the attack signal, the formations break into singles and pairs, each machine stepping over the edge one heartbeat apart. They roll to align their sights on the rectangular perspectives of decks and island superstructures, and then they go nearly straight down. The dive brakes lock open like a holy instrument, perforated petals that let the air tear through instead of ripping the plane apart. The noise is like a thunder saw, not just around the plane but within it, as the whole world turns into that narrow circle where the target grows bigger and the altimeter spins. The pilot counts, judges, holds off just a moment to avoid collision with the plane ahead or to avoid the cone of a bursting gun. He sees the ship rise in a way that only happens in a dive. He sees deck crew running like blood cells in a living body. He feels the sight settle on a place on the deck by the bow or just abaft the island, where aircraft sit waiting with fuel in their veins and bombs under their ribs. When he releases the 1,000-pound bomb, the plane leaps and lightens and he hauls back, a motion that feels like trying to bend gravity. The SBD shudders, compressibility tugging at the controls, the pilot grunting into the pullout. The gunner looks back to keep trouble honest, though in this narrow corridor of time, even the Zeros are a half-second late. For minutes that later will be described as 5, 4, or perhaps 7 depending on the hand on the watch and whether the mind is still ringing. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu become victims of their own momentum. On one carrier, the bombs walk up the deck. On another, a single direct hit penetrates to the hangar where fuel lines trace fatal lines across the floor. And on another, the combination of a near miss and a deck hit does what an American engineer hoped it would do when he drew the bomb's cross-section with care. Fire climbs as quick as thought, fed by aviation gasoline and the presence of other bombs and torpedoes not yet returned to their cradles. It is not just a ship burning, it is an air group's future dissolving into smoke. The SBDs pull out, their wings heavy with the knowledge that the world they rejoin is not the same as the one they left 2 minutes ago. From higher up in the cirrus of altitude, a few seconds later, other SBDs come in again to cut another line of fire into another deck. The sea accepts debris with the same unemotional face as it accepted men an hour before. On Yorktown's side, Max Leslie's bombers find their own carrier target and mark it with precision. On Enterprise's, both scouting and bombing squadrons punch holes in the war machine's heart. It is a geometry of angles and seconds and courage. A part of the math is the slowness that was mocked. The SBD's speed in a dive is governed not by horsepower, but by the discipline of those perforated brakes that let the pilot remain with his target rather than blur past it. It is the kind of slowness that makes a craftsman precise. The planes climb away, the gunners calling contact or clear, emptier and lighter and more mortal for having spent the one thing they carried that could change the morning. From the Japanese flag bridge, the picture degrades from complicated to impossible. Damage control runs at the speed of training and luck, but luck is absent today. Fires do not listen to orders. Magazines are flooded if they can be reached. Cables go slack as heat eats strength out of metal. Flight decks sag in the middle or erupt. There is no heroism free of smoke here. There is only the work of men trying to preserve a ship against arithmetic that has turned against them. The combat air patrol keeps flying, keeps shooting down strays, keeps doing a professional job that now can no longer alter an outcome. Below decks, some men do not reach ladders in time. On the island above, the atoll still smokes, but something else has started to burn brighter now. The war does not end in a morning. The fourth carrier, Hiryu, will strike back and hurt Yorktown enough to make the ocean claim her later. Yorktown's crew will fight their ship as if she is a family member whose life is saved one breath at a time. Pilots from Enterprise and Hornet will go again in the afternoon, and Hiryu will receive the fire that the morning spared her. The details will turn into histories and then into arguments in books, times, and angles debated by people who never had the weight of that specific morning on their shoulders. But the great fact is that the center of gravity shifts in those few minutes around mid-morning when slow dive bombers, dismissed and underestimated, unspring a trap that intelligence and courage set in concert. 4 carriers leave Japan. None of them will ever take planes to war again. Listen closely to the sound in the SBD's cockpit. It is not a handsome sound. It thrums more than it sings. The pilot and his rear gunner talk over the intercom about headings and fuel and friends seen and lost. Years of training live in the way the pilot checks his fuel mixture, sets the prop pitch, notes the cylinder head temperature. The dive bomber is a pilot's airplane, one that makes demands and rewards judgment. The steep angle dive is not a stunt. It is a way to wrestle accuracy out of an environment that wants to deny it. The perforated dive flaps that everyone can see on the wings are a public sign of a private brilliance. They keep the air from slamming into a wall and let it flow through like water through a strainer, giving the pilot control where otherwise there would be blur. The SBD's bomb sight is simple compared to the Norden on a high-altitude bomber, but it is suited to a job that happens in seconds, not minutes. The airframe is tough, the landing gear sturdy for carrier punishment, the range sufficient for the Pacific's rude distances. When people who do not fly laugh at a plane for being slow, it is a little like laughing at a hammer for not being a violin. Somewhere in the morning's broken rhythm, lessons put down their roots. Speed is a form of strength, but not the only form. Coordination across ships and squadrons is the product of discipline and doctrine. Luck is not magic. It is the residue of planning and nerve. Intelligence does not win battles alone, but it can let courage find the right place to work. Men die to buy seconds for other men, and in those seconds, outcomes move. Before Midway, the Japanese carrier arm has an aura that seems made of certainty and reach. After Midway, it has gaps wherever there were masters of craft. Skilled flight leaders, seasoned deck crews, the living memory of combat efficiency. These are as scarce as ships and harder to replace. On the island of Midway, there are Marines who will carry a different set of images. The shock of the first Japanese bombs, the scramble of fighters with engines coughing into health, the feel of sand and coral grit on the teeth after a near miss, the way smoke settles like a second sky over the island. They did their work at the edge of underdog arithmetic, and history is not less grateful for their losses simply because a different spear found the heart. War is not a single action. It is a woven cloth with many threads, some bright, some dark, some disappearing under others. But pull on the morning dive and the tapestry changes shape everywhere. When the SBD pilots describe their dives later, they reach for plain words. You do not need poetry when your hands can still remember the exact pressure it took to pull out without blacking out. You do not need embellishment when a ship that was whole at 1,000 feet up is not whole at 500 feet up. And you saw the moment of change. They speak of altitudes and headings, of the break at 20,000 feet, of rolling inverted to pick up the target, of the push that makes the stomach step aside, of the sight picture and the drift corrected for wind, of the release and the lightness, of the climb and the look back, to see if a hit marked the deck. They talk of flak patterns and of tracers that always seem to pass a foot behind the wingtip even when they do not. They talk about the way the ship's wake looks like a white path a man could walk on, if he could walk on water. They talk about the heat that reaches up from fire to touch a face already flushed from effort. There is a temptation to paint this as inevitability after the fact. That is a kind of disrespect. Nothing about this morning felt inevitable to the men living it. The torpedo squadrons did not fly with a guarantee. The dive bomber leaders did not push their throttles forward with promises in their pockets. The codebreakers did not sleep easy. The admirals did not look at their maps and see assurance. They saw contingencies. The SBD crews did not dive with a narrator in their head. They dove with training in their bones and a nation behind them that could build more planes, yes, but could not build more of the minutes they needed. They earned those minutes in the old way, by being brave and by being good at their craft. In the afternoon, after Hiryu burns, and after Yorktown's people do everything men can do to keep a wounded ship alive, and after the hectic lines of action begin to settle into exhaustion, the ocean has a different sound. It is softer, though nothing has changed about the waves. Ships sit damaged or busy. SBDs return low on fuel. Some may land away from home decks, some may have to ditch. Flight deck crews blink salt from their eyes and run to chock wheels. Pilots climb down and check each other's faces to make sure everyone is still here. In a hangar bay, a man might sit on an ammunition crate and let his hands shake now that they are allowed to. Somewhere in the Pacific, a destroyer turns a circle and pulls a pilot out of the water. Somewhere else, men are counted, and not all the counts are right. Look again at the SBD's shape. It is honest in its lines, the way a working boat is honest. It carries its meaning plainly. In photographs taken later, it looks like a tool resting after a job, and that is right. The Dauntless, with its deep belly and its wide wings, is more than a sum of parts. In this battle it becomes a sign, a reminder that in war, expectations are just kindling if you carry a match made of will and skill. People call it slow. That is fine. Speed did not sink those carriers. Accuracy did. Discipline did. Timing did. The willingness to keep searching when fuel gauges pushed toward unkind marks did. The ability to take a machine to the edge of its envelope and bring it home without tearing it apart did. The Japanese officers who dismissed the Dauntless made a rational judgment in a certain narrow light. They had reasons. They looked at charts and performance figures and compared numbers. They prized speed because speed allowed initiative and control, and because their own doctrine had been validated again and again in the early months of the war. They were not fools, but rational judgments can be wrong when they are too neat. The SBD's speed mattered less inside the logic of a dive that turned altitude into accuracy and precision into destruction. No deckhand running a hose cares how fast the bomber was in level flight when the hangar below him has become a furnace. No officer on a burning bridge thinks about the number in a performance table. He thinks about the rising heat, the alarm that will not stop, the ship's list, and the hard choice of scuttling charges. In the months after, Both navies will write reports. The American ones will note the value of concentrated, coordinated dive bombing and of the need to continue developing dive bombers and fighter cover and better torpedoes. The Japanese ones will talk of scouting failures, of a delayed search plane, of decisions about arming that could not keep pace with changing threat pictures, of the danger of having fueled and armed aircraft sitting on the decks. People will point to the delayed launch of a scout from a cruiser, to headings adjusted by a few degrees, to that single destroyer wake that McClusky followed, to radios that worked and radios that did not. Each thread is real. No single thread is the whole. Together they make a rope strong enough to turn the war. If you stand on Midway's reef edge long after the guns have quieted, the ocean looks like it did the day before the battle. That is the ocean's way. But beneath it lie hulls that tell a different truth. The surface is for birds and light. Underneath is memory. There is a kind of moral geometry here too, a sense that things that are underestimated can become levers. The Dauntless was not glamorous. It carried 2 men, a bomb, and a faith that steep angles could carve history. It carried the fingerprints of mechanics and the hopes of people at home who crossed days off calendars and learned to read tiny letters in telegrams with dread. It carried the humility of a tool and the pride of a craft. In the end, the question of why those carriers died in a handful of minutes is easier to ask than to answer. There are technical answers. The SBD's dive brakes created controllable descent rates that allowed precise release at low altitude. The bomb loads were matched to the vulnerabilities of flight decks and hangar decks crowded with fueled aircraft and ordnance. The American pilots had trained for dives that other air arms considered too steep or too dangerous. The Japanese task force at that moment was caught mid-cycle with planes and fuel and bombs in poor harmony for defense. The combat air patrol was pulled low by the torpedo attacks and thus mispositioned for the high threat. Communications and doctrine made it hard to rearm and reconfigure fast enough. All true, but there is a non-technical answer too. Men who were told their machine was slow refused to accept that slowness as destiny. They used it. They turned it into steadiness. They turned it into an advantage in the one maneuver that mattered on the day that mattered. Think of a dive bomber on the step of a wave-traced sky. The pilot pushes the nose over and the world becomes an hourglass. Sand is time, and it is falling fast. He holds his breath without meaning to. The ship grows. The lines on the deck become planks. The target point stops moving sideways. He thumbs the release, and the plane lifts slightly, as if relieved of a worry. He pulls and the straps bite, and the horizon bends, and then the plane is flying again and the lungs remember their job. That is all it is, in a way. A sequence of actions that, taken together and multiplied by dozens, can turn the largest ocean into a stage on which a small, slow airplane rewrites the script. After Midway, the war is still long. There will be Guadalcanal. There will be nights in the slot. There will be new airplanes and more carriers and submarines patrolling lanes that used to be secure. There will be factories at home running shifts around the clock and pilots in training who will learn lessons written on that June morning. There will be Japanese pilots who cannot be replaced fast enough to match the loss of experience. There will be families on both sides waiting for names to come home. There will be historians later who will disagree on details and agree on the outline that matters. And through it all, in museums and photographs and a few flying examples that make older men look up from their lawn chairs with eyes that see farther than the rest of us, there will be the Dauntless, carrying more than a bomb, carrying a memory. The movie of the morning ends without applause. Ships cool. Smoke thins. The sun goes on doing what it does. The men who flew and the men who tried to stop them absorb what has happened in the only ways people can. Some talk, some do not. Some carry guilt they should not carry. Some carry pride they have earned. The ocean keeps its counsel, but if you listen to the wind across a quiet flight deck, if you lay a hand on the cool skin of an airplane that has earned its dents, you can hear the truth, steady as a heartbeat. Slow is not the same as weak. Underestimated is not the same as unworthy. On a morning in June, in a few minutes that stretched to the size of a legend, a slow airplane did what faster ones could not. It fell like a decision, it struck like a verdict, and it rose again to tell the story.